Welcome to another Saturday Satsang. This is just a reminder, this is the last one for a little over a month. The next one will be on the 19th of November. And that's because there's the 3-week live-in retreat happening in the next, over the next 3 weeks, starting in a week's time. So one of the most beautiful parts of the teaching is one of the descriptions that I like the most is a description of what a human being is. And the description is that the human being is impersonal consciousness of source, linked or identified with a particular body-mind organism, functioning as personal consciousness. So I'll repeat that. A human being is the impersonal consciousness of source, linked to a particular body-mind organism and functioning through that body-mind organism as personal consciousness. So what that is really saying is that that which is flowing through each of us in what turns out to be the personal manifestation. So your particular words, your particular personality, your particular behaviors, your particular thoughts, your particular emotions, your particular reactions. All of those that are particular to you, the things that happen moment after moment after moment as an expression that we call Roger or Mary or John, that is impersonal consciousness of source functioning through a particular vehicle, body-mind organism, and then expressing as personal consciousness. And so the importance of that concept is that it points to the fact that at the base of the personal consciousness is impersonal consciousness. The impersonal consciousness is prior to the color and the conditioning and the movement of the personal. And it is a place that we can rest. We can rest as personal consciousness. Or rather, we can rest as impersonal consciousness. And from that place of resting and being the impersonal consciousness, the personal manifestations can be seen as a happening. Because if we're resting as impersonal consciousness, then all of the personal manifestations are essentially not what we are from that place, from the place of resting as impersonal consciousness. The personal expressions essentially are happening, but they are not what I am. And this then ties in with another of the concepts in the teaching, which points to the fact that thoughts arise, that emotions arise, that speaking happens, that tasting, touching happens. And what it's trying to emphasize is that there isn't a doer of these things, but they are functions that happen. So everything in life is a happening and not anyone's doing. And that is not meant to be just a belief that we run with, but something that can become self-evident. Now, it makes less sense when there is a strong identification with the body as the one that is operating the body. When that is in place, the notion that thinking happens, that emotions arise, doesn't land other than as a concept, as an idea, or as something someone says. But the more and more that our thinking or that awareness comes to the process of thinking, for example, or the happening of thinking, and the more likely it is that it might start to be felt that, oh, the commentary about such and such just came out of what we could say out of not being there. So it's often referred to comes out of nothing, i.e. it wasn't there and then it happens and it carries on and then it stops. And the same with speaking, comes out of nothing. There's no speaking and then speaking happens. And if we find ourselves, not because we do it, but because it starts to happen, resting as that which is not the speaker, but rather that which is aware of speaking happening, then an aha moment happens, because it's, for my whole life I have been convinced, because it's how it was seen and how it was felt, that I am the speaker. And after sufficient, we could call it detachment, which is simply being less and less involved with your thinking, less and less involved with the movements of the body, but being interested in being aware of them. And as that awareness function strengthens, what we find is that the ground of being shifts to a place of what we can call witnessing. And witnessing is witnessing without a witness. There isn't someone, especially not the body, witnessing. There is just awareness, aware of thoughts happening, speaking happening, feelings happening, sounds happening, arising and subsiding. And that essentially means we become more and more grounded in what we could call a true knowing of ourself, as opposed to the heavy identification with the form, the body, that tends to dictate that the formless essence, the witnessing, is covered up, and then there is no sense of being other than the body. And frankly, if we're heavily identified with the body, then life is a roller coaster, because things going right and wrong are essentially almost relative to the body. They are an attack on who we are if we're identified as the body. And the witnessing is much less affected by outcomes, which is why it starts to become more likely that the response, oh well, yep, it is what it is, it happened, can start to arise, as opposed to, this can't have happened, why did this happen, who's to blame? Because from the place of being grounded in the formless essence, outcomes are less a matter of life and death. So, given this is the last satsang for a while, I thought I'd go straight into questions and answers and comments. And I'll start with Francois.
Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, okay. Francois.
Hi. I had a thought. I was listening something from you, and I had a thought about. I was wondering if in my system there is still an attachment to pleasure, because of course, I like pleasure, like it's normal, but I wonder how much, and is it maybe very subtle, but there is still maybe an attachment to it. And I wanted to know what you think about how can I figure out if it is not or if it is.
It's a good question, because at some point life is, the process of life is really always about optimization. Now that sounds like a contradiction, because in teachings, essentially what is often spoken about is that you can't control life, and the pleasure and pain is actually not the most important thing. In fact, we can be happy regardless of circumstance, regardless of pleasure and pain. But the reason that is focused on is because being at peace is a very, very significant part of the optimization of life. And the problem is, if we call it an optimization, it makes it something. And when the teaching phrases it as, your happiness isn't to be found in the flow of life. Happiness is your attitude to the flow of life. That doesn't seem like anything It's not a something. It's an attitude. And then furthermore, it is described that peace of mind is the absence of the suffering attitude, the guilt, the blame, the worry, the expectation. And so that's a very effective way of firstly putting pleasure and pain out of the picture, and looking at our involvement in pleasure and pain. And the reason ultimately that is done is because that is the biggest part of optimization. If you're going to optimize, if there is going to be an optimization of one's life, there's no point trying to optimize the pleasure and pain and leave the suffering component untouched, because that suffering component is going to contaminate into the circumstantial improvements, if there are such, if someone does if there is optimization or get more pleasure, essentially. The fact that the suffering hasn't been dealt with means that it's always going to be disturbed. And so the main part of the optimization is peace of mind. However, having said that, life is always going to be a combination of one's attitude and the pleasure and pain. So once the peace of mind part has set in, meaning that there isn't the same involvement and attitude of guilt and blame and pride and expectation as there was before, then we need to start looking at the components of circumstance and, where possible, sure, function or do what you can to improve the situation, but knowing that you're not in control of the outcome, which is the same with one's peace of mind. Attention gets put on there. Now, whether the suffering comes to an end or not in our control. So your question is, I like pleasure, and my point here is, yes, pleasure is much more pleasurable. So it is much preferable, and the body is going to like pleasure, and that is part of an optimization of life. So there's nothing wrong with a movement towards pleasure. Where a movement towards pleasure is problematic is where it has become the primary focus, and therefore the peace of mind hasn't been looked at, and it is going to be perpetuating suffering if we are continually seeking pleasure. So that's why we deal with peace of mind first. Now, you know whether there's attachment by looking at the attitude when the pleasure and pain, or when pain is delivered, or when your pleasure is taken away. That will give you the answer. If the pain is delivered or pleasure is taken away, and it is received with equanimity, then you know that there isn't attachment. If it is not received with equanimity, which means there is a craving for what has been lost, a feeling like something very significant has been taken away, not only significant on the level of pleasure and pain, but significant on the level of who I am, then there's something to be looked at. And an important part of this, I think, is to look at what this word equanimity means. Because if we think equanimity means that someone can come and take some food that you are eating, for example, and for you to think, equanimity means that there should be no reaction to my food being taken by someone who hasn't asked and just comes and takes the plate away from while you're eating. And that often is what someone assumes equanimity means. In a circumstance, if that happens, if a stranger comes and takes your plate at the restaurant without asking, there is bound to be a biological response. And it makes sense that there's a biological response. There would be something wrong with us if there wasn't a biological response. Now, different people will have different biological responses. Someone might be stunned and not say anything. Someone else might shrug it off and really say, oh, well, strange things happen. And they biologically have, let's say, given a lot of thought to things like confronting someone. They might have thought, well, if someone is wired in a way that is going to take something off my table, then maybe I'll just let them have it. Maybe that's the best. And so someone might say nothing but be not so stunned. And someone else might get very angry and confront the person. Now, it sounds like the middle one is the one with equanimity. But in fact, any of the three responses to the situation can be called a biological response, and it hasn't necessarily gone into suffering yet. If someone is prone to go into suffering, then the suffering will be there at the biological response. However, if the suffering has stopped, you can find yourself getting angry, but very quickly, or at least either very quickly in the moment where you find yourself not interested in getting angry anymore, or after the anger has played itself out, there is an acceptance of what has happened. Even if it didn't work out in your favor, you go, well, this is what happened. Life does strange things. Someone took my food. I got very angry and I ended up getting hurt. And if we can process that, then we say nothing more, no more story to have about it. No need to blame the other person. Now, sure, if the police say what happens, you give your statement about all of that. If there is a situation where you can get some compensation, you might go to court, and all of that doesn't necessarily mean that you're blaming them. It just means you're following process. And you will know based on the feelings inside after the event horizontally in time.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Because I have not my microphone. So is it okay? You still
Yes,
hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. In fact, I was not really listening to you because I know what you were talking, and I was letting people hear you. And I was thinking in the meantime, maybe it was like because this peace of mind is so much here now that he has changed my my attitude towards pleasure and pain, and so sometimes I don't distinct really pain from pleasure because I'm fine anyway. And it's like I'm attached, in a sense. I was wondering if I was attached to this new type of pleasure, this pleasure inside me, something in those lines. Can you see what I mean?
Well, that can, yeah, that can be another movement that happens, which could, in fact, you could, at some point, if that does happen, you could see it as a bit of a problem, because what might be the case is that the process of moving away from pleasure and pain, which is very important, in order for our attachment to pleasure and pain to fall away, I think we need to go through a process of essentially renouncing pleasure for a bit, where you know, a teaching tells you that some teachings will actually tell you that pleasure is almost the devil's, or you know, it is where we are going to get lost, and so there needs to be a moving away from pleasure, a recognizing how attached to pleasure we are, and coming slowly to a place where we become indifferent, which is what you described, where we find a peace because we are no longer attached to pleasure. Where it's a problem is that if the practice essentially of detachment, in order to deliver this recognition that, oh, I exist, independent of pleasure and pain, meaning, so if pleasure isn't delivered, it's not so important. It's definitely not as important as I used to think. So that's the process brings us to that place, and then we might think that, oh, that is how life is meant to be lived, just resting in this being. And where I started off is that the optimization includes ultimately an optimization of both layers, the attitudinal layer, which is the most important, and pleasure and pain, which means we have to continue to live life as a human being in circumstance where there is pleasure and pain, and we might stop doing that in a way because we have become, on the one hand, we've become less interested in pleasure and pain. That is good, but what if our interest is still, or our lack of interest, is being influenced by the practice of detachment? And if that's the case, we'll find something that says, oh, a light bulb goes off and say, oh, actually, I seem to be ignoring pleasure, or actually moving away from pleasure.
Sorry, can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Yeah, sorry, because I was not talking about indifference. I was talking about a kind of pleasure of the taste of the peace of mind. But I'm not indifferent to pleasure and pain. It's like this maybe the word you use, equanimity, but it's the most thing is pleasure. Maybe so my life is pleasure mostly and very little pain, and that may be why I am wondering if I'm still attached to pleasure or something like that, because I like pleasure, and what I live is mostly pleasure, and this equanimity, it's pleasurable, it's very delightful, and it's not at all indifference. I'm very, very into life, and I enjoying myself very much. So I'm not in a retreat state of mind. You see?
Yeah. Well, that sounds fine to me. I guess I would point out that peace of mind is not pleasurable. So if you are experiencing pleasure from, let's say, resting in being, which we might think is peace of mind, you moved away from attachment to pleasure and pain, and you found this freedom, which we can call peace of mind, and in that space you can feel a pleasure that you are describing.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that pleasure is not peace of mind, but it is accompanying peace of mind, and it is a pleasure of the self. And because it is not a worldly pleasure, and it is an inward pleasure, we say, oh, that must be the pleasure of peace of mind. And in fact, it is there are two components. There is peace of mind, and then there are various joys and pleasures of self. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's important to categorize it as pleasure, and not say it is the pleasure of peace of mind. It is a pleasure of self, but peace of mind is different. Peace of mind is the absence of suffering. It isn't the pleasure of being that we can feel, or the joy. It's much simpler than that. And so much so that what you need to find is the peace of mind when it arises with no pleasure, without the pleasure of the being. And then you go, oh, that's peace of mind, which is not something, and it's not the pleasure of being. And I see that that peace of mind is there because the very simple peace of mind I'm talking about, when you see it without any specific pleasures, including the pleasure of self or being or joy, or then it clicks. Oh yes, peace of mind is really not something. It is the absence of suffering, and very often you have peace of mind and these extra pleasures.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I get your point, and it was very interesting. And I will see where I go from here. Thank you very much, Roger, and I wish you a good retreat with your people over there.
Thank you, Francois.
Just to know,
Yep.
I was in like a few months ago. I was thinking about, may I come to Australia or something like this, and of course I said to myself, I will see how it goes, because it's not like I really need it, but I was thinking about it, and I don't know why. And finally, I think I will not go. So, and I think it's full anyway. And so,
Funny enough, there is one more place for one male
I
participant.
heard that the other week you talked about it, and I was thinking, oh, maybe so still I have time, but I think I will enjoy my time here in France, and I wish you the best for this 3 weeks retreat. Thank you, Roger, very much.
Thank you, Francois. Hi, Dalia.
Hi, Roger.
Hello.
Sorry?
I said hello.
From Belgium. Roger, we had a very nice conversation the last week. I don't know if you remember, but I would like to just to explain my background so that we can go to my question and what I'm through now. 10 years ago, somehow like that, or 8 years ago, I came across I Am That, the book of Maharaj, in the midst of a very quite serious illness where I was stuck in pain and, well, full a lot of pain in my bed. And for 2 years, I really couldn't have a lot of activities because, it was something not curable. I was sad, but anyway, it's cured now. And ever since, I have always prayed that I would have a guide that would make these teachings, which my mind didn't understand at all, available to me. So I was somehow guided to Rupert Spira's teachings, and I attended his meetings, and it made it very clear to me. Then, of course, the practice was quite different, and I am very much into, maybe too much into those matters, because I don't see what else I can do in my life and dedicate my life to. I have a very peaceful life. I have a very loving husband, and my settings are perfectly okay for me. So there's no escape at all. On the contrary, I should be enjoying my life, but it's just a nagging pursuit of truth. I can't help it. And Ramana and all the teachings have gone through my mind, my heart, my soul, whatever. And this is the setting. I think I have a clear understanding. I do my best to apply and to do the shadow work also, of course, which is very important to me anyway. Okay. So my question is about after our last conversation last week, you suggested me to inquire into the nature of the narrative behind the inner feeling of resistance, which I could not really point out. I was resisting to. So I really dove into it, and what came up at the end, because it took some exploration, it was really the presence of hatred in me, which I would, of course, never allow anyone at any cost to see, because I would feel guilty, and this, I also followed the Course in Miracles and blah blah, and all these things came up and made sense in that regard. So then I embraced hatred instead of going, and I saw the movement of the mind and the willingness to hide it from myself, of course, seeing out there and just okay. Moreover, I saw that hatred couldn't exist without worldly love, I would say, or whatever you may call it. Anyway, so these are the necessary opposites for the manifestations to come about in my world, in my mind. So I really saw the split mind into action very clearly in its deepest, for me, in its deepest way at this moment of time and space. So what came about ever since, I already had seen the structure of the mind as the structure of the mind, as the world was already somehow doubtful and was beginning to be reduced to the mind. I don't know if it's clear. That the mind thought is, the world is my world is thought. Is it clear for you what I'm saying?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So my question is, this morning I woke up and I saw, and the question came, what if all the sages say and all the teachings say that the world is only within my mind, the thought forms, the appearance in the thought form every morning. There's no solidity at all. The only seeming solidity is through the five senses, which is also a translation of sense perceptions. And I was a little bit, it was more yes than no. But since I don't have any proper guide to just share these, and I'm left alone with myself, I was wondering if you have anything to say about it, because it's quite different from the way I used to see things, and because I as I said, I'm really devoted to that, and I can tell that more than 9 hours a day. Even when I do cooking, and I just rewire, put videos of you, of Romana, or whatever, for years now. So it is like the Inception, the film is like everything is not crumbling, but just there's this doubt in which the truth seems to see things as they are. It's not different. It's just not what I thought. It had as reality out there. And my favorite book in the description wise is, I don't know if you know it, it's Atmananda Krishna Menon, Atmadarshan. And when I read it, it's too much for me to take whatever I can realize now. So I'm a little bit, I feel a little bit alone. And moreover, I'm talking to you, but I'm saying to myself, what the hell am I talking to someone that is in my, like not dream, but, in my reality, but within me. So what?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused and lost, and as you may see, it's clear and not
so
clear.
This topic that you're focusing on, or that's come up just in the last few days, is but that you would have come across for a long time, is very important to just stick with, and that is that there is no out there. Mm-hmm. That the experience is happening inside, not outside.
Yes.
But not inside the person. So the problem is that you would have been reading the texts as though the experience is happening inside Dahlia. Dahlia is happening inside.
Yeah, that I have seen also, that the doership is also a process, is a happening. The doership itself is a happening in the whole manifestation, or the doership, or the me, or the mind is also a movement of the mind. I have been watching it very thoroughly, very well, but I see it, and it is.
But not only doership, but subject. Who is the subject?
There is no subject. Yeah.
There is an ultimate subject, but that ultimate subject is not the body, is not the person. And so when there is this exploration about everything is happening inside, the shift needs to be not inside the person, but rather inside consciousness.
I fully agree.
And the consciousness is what we are. So, and that is experienceable. So the inquiry that looks around, because the inquiry, it's not just inquiry, it's inquiry in conjunction with awareness. So what does it mean that the room is inside what I am? Which mean, and the table which is inside the room is inside what I am. The body that is inside the room is inside what I am. So that means what I am is not the body. The personal
it's very clear to me. I have already, it's very clear to me that it's my storyline is within me, the name, the form. Identification is still there. It doesn't mean it's not there. But what you are talking about is very clear. And the exploration goes on. But yes, of course, it's the ultimate subject is to, is to know.
So, but are you able to sit? Does being, witnessing happen? Meaning, is it palpably obvious what is meant by? So the bookcase, for example, the table is not made of form, but made of consciousness.
There is only in the knowing of it. I can yes, I have, Well, table is a name, and the name is just a name. It's a subtle.
Yeah, but what about the object? So even if we take the name table off, the object itself
is there seeing, there's seeing, and then there's labeling, which separates the forms. but the seeing is one, and to the seeing there is only the knowing of it. The movement is still there, you see, but I really, so it's very, this is very clear. I'm just, but there is only knowing. And one of the phrases I have come up with is in this, you might allow me to read one sentence. The knowledge of a thing does not prove the thing's existence. Is there not the knowledge of a serpent in a rope and the knowledge of objects in a dream? The knowledge of a thing does not show the thing's nature, but only shows knowledge. And after having read that, and I said, one thing, I was mistaken, everything, it must be mistaken. And then everything just, this doubt, this true doubt, made everything seem not unreal, but not as solid as before. The mind, the world, the body, and the whole thing.
Yeah, so that is important, that just because something is perceived doesn't make it so. I think so. This point about knowledge of something doesn't mean that we know it correctly,
No,
or that
it
we
means
know
that
it.
there is knowledge. So everything is bringing back to the knowledge, knowing. This is the only certitude, and all the rest is questionable. And it is question. And when we question it truly, I guess this is where things start to shake their solidity. So this is where I get lost, because I don't know what to, where to.
So there are two stages. One is to see that the labeling, as you said, the thinking about the objects, how the thinking about the objects and the objects are two things, because often they are intertwined. And so it seems like there has been the awakening to your thinking about the things. So then there is, you are able to be with what is, and see the difference between being with what is and thinking about what is. So yeah, but what I was pointing out earlier is we can also use the word knowing in several ways. The awareness of experiential awareness that there is no table, that table is just an appearance, not as intellectual knowledge because sages have told you, but rather because what is aware of the table is not the body, mind, organism, but rather awareness. And from that place of knowing the table from the position of awareness, it becomes apparent that the table is never separate from that awareness, and actually just an appearance in that awareness. And that is the next shift after the shift where thinking and the object, because at first, when we wake up to the difference between thinking about the object and knowing the object in the absence of thought about the object, it still is a relationship from the body object aware of a table object, let's say. What I'm speaking about is the shift from object perceiving object to subjectivity, meaning awareness prior to the body, becoming aware of the fact that there are no objects, that there is only appearance within itself. And so that is worth pursuing the thought that maybe everything that we know is not as real as it appears. If meditation, a waking state meditation happens regularly, where when you are doing the dishes, for example, it is the movement of the body is happening, and then the thought arises, what is aware of this movement, and how can it be that this movement is happening inside what I am that is aware of this? That is what I would be focusing on.
So really, to stand as the substratum, ultimate substratum, to the body, to the world, to the senses, to the thoughts, whatever, and then abide there, rather than going into back to experience and explore the nature of experience again and again. This is what you suggest.
Depends.
Really abide as that.
Yeah, if you can, is there a familiarity and of abiding as the substratum?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
there is practice and familiarity, yes, but I'm not abiding all the time, of course. I mean, this is why we are talking. Otherwise, I would be by my But
yeah.
Yes, at this point, what is the best, approach?
It depends what you mean. If you say practice, like if you are practicing, but
no,
the stance.
no, yeah, it's more as a what's the best stance as per your experience. Is it going back to experience?
The best stance depends on where the person is. So I'm trying to establish whether you are.
I'm accustomed to the being of as awareness, yes, without object and within the object.
Right. In that case, then it is important to reintegrate that into the body and realize that that substratum is what is functioning through the body, and that this life is actually to be lived as a person, not as the substratum, but as a person that is aware of their essence being the substratum.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Hi, Yarek. Oh, Jessica.
Yeah, hi, Roger.
Hello.
So there's a lot of similarity in what was just spoken, but I'll word my question nonetheless. So for me, I've been reading and doing work for a bit now, but it's been at a very intellectual level. So the intellectual understanding of the observer, the witness, all of that is sort of there, but there is no experience of it. And recently, as I've started delving more into it, listening to you, listening to Ramesh, reading Robert Adams, I feel a shift has happened. there is almost a resistance coming in energetically within, which is saying, which kind of feels like it's just pulling me back from going and um, getting away from the whole concept of doership. And along with it, there are experiences which come. So the small things I'm able to navigate. So if somebody were to come, like you said, pick up my food in a restaurant, it's something I believe I could navigate. Uh, but there are things happening in relationship, in major things which make surrender very difficult for me. And my question really is, I would like to fall back into that supreme awareness. So, let go of this doership and go into trust and go into allowance. How do I do that?
Well, the surrender is the absence of the one trying to do it, right? So you have to surrender to even trying to do it, because it might not be destiny, let's say. And so if it's not destiny, it's not going to happen. And so if you want it to happen, there is a fight between you that wants it to happen and destiny. So surrender is the falling away of wanting it to happen, which really means a surrender to destiny. And it might become apparent. See, this is what it means. The outcome is not in your control. So stop trying to control the outcome. But we're so accustomed to thinking, well, if it's going to happen, I'm going to have to do it.
Right.
And surrender is the opposite of what is our ingrained assumption about how life works. So it's very counterintuitive, which is why it doesn't tend to happen very regularly, because people are trying to do surrender. And surrender it's a spontaneous thing when we realize the absolute futility of trying, and it is a stopping because of a spontaneous realization that everything I've been doing is the opposite of surrender. Or rather, everything that's been happening in the seeking is more controlling. And so that's where in the moment there's just a stop. It's like there's nothing to do. You're off duty.
It's just that in daily life, it sometimes becomes difficult to draw that line, that where, I don't know if I'm able to explain it.
Because I'm not telling you to do it.
Yes, I'm not the
I don't know if it's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Right.
So that's why I'm telling someone to surrender. I'm just describing what surrender is, which is not this. It's not a prescription. It's not a prescription where I'm saying, here it is, now go and do it. It is a description that surrender is the falling away of our innate assumption that I need to make life happen. So when you say in daily life it is hard, yes, that is destiny creating the opposite of surrender. And so there's nothing you can do about it, because you're not the one creating the involvement. That is destiny doing that. So surrender is even surrender to the fact that non-surrender is happening. Surrender to the fact that involvement is
That makes
happening.
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
It's not unusual that in life things happen and there is reaction to it, there is guilt, there is blame, there is hatred. That's completely common, right? That's the human condition, that's destiny. And it's the same for seekers. Seekers continue to have that happen. And the difference with a seeker is potentially there can be a surrender to, this is not me failing, but this is destiny unfolding. And so a seeker is in a better position to surrender to suffering. That surrender to suffering doesn't mean suffering stops. It means there is just an acceptance from an understanding that suffering is a happening according to God's will.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Hi, Yarek.
Okay. Can you hear me, brother?
Yes, I
Hello.
can.
Hello, my
Hello.
friend. Hello. So,
Hello, good to see you.
good to see you too.
People are going to think that the video has frozen.
Yeah. So glad to see you. Maybe I put some question. So what's the relation between the person, the one like from your side, like Rogerness, and the big perspective, and the big perspective and Jarosoft, for example. What, how you Roger can describe this like,
Is your question is, what is the relationship between the big perspective in Roger's case, as opposed to in
No.
someone else.
I wouldn't ask you to describe like from this side. I'm like asking you generally. Can you describe for us, for the Yarek and for the other attenders, more elaboration, Roger, if you could, how it's related the like the ego, the structure, and my question is, do you still have like need to build the Rogerness, the the ego functional ego of Roger to like yeah, I think you you can, or it's like organ and Roger just like, I will be silent now.
Well, it's important to describe the difference between ego and the psychological aspect of the ego. Because in this teaching, different to other teachings, in this teaching, we are the ego. Ultimately, we come to the recognition, I am the ego, and even after enlightenment, I am an ego. So Ramesh used to say, Ramana was an ego, Ramesh is an ego, Yarek is an ego. After enlightenment, there is an ego without the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome. And before enlightenment, there is an ego with the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome. So what will I have after enlightenment that I didn't have before?
Yes, it will be the same because ego is completely illusional, like the illusion. This is it's not existed, but in some perspective, like from the space-time, we can see that exists. But from the perspective okay.
So in practical terms, sticking with the definition that we've used, you are an ego, I am an ego, Ramana was an ego, Ramesh was an ego.
Okay.
The difference is that there is an ego with the belief in personal doership and attachment to outcomes. That means an ego that has a certain belief structure and certain movement that they are pushed towards, so a craving for outcomes because of a sense of lack and a sense of uncomfortableness and the belief that one's happiness is to be found in outcomes. All of that because of the structure being a particular way. So that is the ego with the psychological components of doership and attachment to outcome. After enlightenment, the ego is still there. Roger, Ramesh was still there with the particular personality traits, biological preferences, etc. But the psychological attachment to outcomes, the psychological belief that I am making my body function, I am making the thoughts happen, all of that's fallen away. So what you have after enlightenment is still an ego, but without the component that creates suffering. And that, so when you say you end up after enlightenment with what you had before because it's all illusory, that I think is more theoretical, because it's like everything is an illusion or everything is an appearance, and after liberation the appearance is still there. In practical terms, we need to look at what practically changes, and I think that it's important to look at it in this sense, that we have to live, and we do live as a human being after liberation. And that's why the Zen sayings, before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. So the biological preferences and structure remains. The circumstance you find yourself in remains, but the attitude to the circumstance is what changes.
Okay. Sorry, because I had some like fluid, but it's not important. But I can like sometimes cope in English, you know. So I'm sorry about the bad direction. It's not in my control sometimes. Sorry. Okay,
It's
but
okay.
I like this side trying to be conscious and like mindful about what happened, and like to feel body. It's important to be grounded in the body, not maybe so much in the thought, because it's tendency to thought give the like spinning, and there are some words fascinating and with other like attributes, but let's leave this aside for now. So because in order, okay, I will need to connect to my. So the ego after enlightenment is like the liberated one, because there is no suffering. There is still like maybe some like experience, the body experience, maybe some pleasure, sometimes pain, but there is no attachment, which will be, because this like trust. There is only not trust, because there is the seeing that the military me is floating with the big me, like, and this is like sometimes we can say that there is safety for the ego, that he knows that the God like take care about the stuff, let's say. So it's very liberated, because then, as you say, little ego is out of duty. It's very tiring for the little ego to all do for their own. Yeah. Do you agree with what I say, or do you want to like refer for my words?
Well, it's you know,
You don't understand.
it's a process. It's a process. So you're talking about, in a way, witnessing the little ego, or not being that. And that is what happens when the doership is, I guess, still there to some extent. It is the letting it be what it is. Because it's a process, I think that when the doership is completely annihilated, then you find yourself just being the human being, and no question of witnessing or being separate from the little ego. You are the ego, and there's no problem with being the ego, because that ego doesn't suffer anymore. It doesn't produce suffering. So there, as things change, the perspective, or at different parts along the journey, it will be described differently. So there is a part on the journey where we say, I am the witnessing consciousness, and I'm not, interested in.
Okay, Roger. So is the part in the journey that you can travel like through time, through space, through time, and see different like episodes from the like history of mankind, or being like in the same time in many universe, like how to say in English, universe.
I haven't.
You have many
I haven't got to
universes, and you have like flashback that now in 5 seconds you are in Roger, and then you see like in other like different like imagination you're so big, and you are like in different area. So I'm like curious, what's in your like. I can feel that you are very now humble, and sorry about my imagination now.
It's okay, but what I'm saying is, you might not be hearing it, is that I have a very ordinary life of being a person. So no special experiences, no traveling through time, no knowing myself as another person.
So Roger, very excuse me that I interrupt you. So you don't have need for looking for the meaning, because when you are full in the moment, you don't need to even ask this question, because it's like self-evident that the fulfillment is like coming from the. It's like when you do some work which you love, and the time disappear, and you for example, Yarek, like math. So when they do math, there is like maybe some 3 hours and there was like enjoyment. There was, I think, maybe if there will be some people around, they will be saying, Yarek, enjoy math. So, but in that moment, Yarek didn't ask about meaning. The meaning was doing math, for example, and or even like put away trash, like about cleaning the house.
Let me interrupt, and I'll put it a different perspective. There is that, what you're saying, but from the case of exploring it, it is much more useful, I think, to realize that any question of meaning comes out of us when we feel uncomfortable. If there is uncomfortableness, then we think about meaning. When uncomfortableness is not there, meaning is irrelevant.
Okay.
Not because you're lost in the activity, but because there is no uncomfortableness. So I'm not uncomfortable, and I say, who cares about meaning? It doesn't arise to me. But if there is uncomfortableness, then we say, oh, it must be because I don't know the meaning of life. If only I knew the meaning of life, then this uncomfortableness would be gone. So that's why, they say you don't get great answers to these great questions, but the questions fall away. Why do the questions fall away? The questions fall away because the questions actually come out of uncomfortableness, and the uncomfortableness falls away, so the question falls away.
Okay. Yes. So, Roger, do you agree that in the world there are people with liberated egos and the people with with not liberated egos? Do you agree with this statement, or no?
Yeah, as long as, because the many teachings will say there is enlightenment is where there, no one can be enlightened, and so what that means is no belief in personal doership, or no person with the belief in personal doership can be enlightened, because the belief in personal doership and attachment to outcomes is the opposite of enlightenment. And so often we know ourselves as that entity, the one that is attached to outcomes and believes in doership. And enlightenment is the end of that one.
Yeah, but
the end of.
I know exactly what you are saying, Roger. So, but I think and you, from your like seeing and from your maturing as Roger, you go through adolescence, like you were young, you were like, then you were like taking more and more years.
So I would say yes, there are liberated egos.
Yes, but what I want to ask you, that I think psychology like is saying that the forming of ego is the, like, let's say, natural like thing, and so each person needs to like go this way, that forming ego and then liberated from this ego, if it's happened.
You don't get liberated from the ego. You are the ego.
Okay.
You get liberated from the belief in personal doership and
okay. So I will interrupt you because I want to be like precise now. So do you believe that there is in the world child without from the birth of the form?
Why is this important?
Please let me ask you this question. Can I? So when some form is born, so
I don't know.
But I think it's not that the like at like put the finger and the child is liberated from the ego, like it's not free, from the beginning.
You can't get liberated from the ego. You are the ego. The child is the ego. You can't be born without an ego.
So because some teachings say that ego, like other name for even like evilness in the world, devilness, it's like attachment with this ego, this little me, because this being created suffering. Is it true?
That's the psychological me, not the ego. So if you want to be precise, you have to realize that I defined what ego was in this teaching, and I said different to other teachings. Okay. So within this teaching, there is an ego. Ramana, after enlightenment, was an ego. He was an ego that no longer had the deeply ingrained belief in personal doership and attachment to outcomes. He still responded to his name when it was called. He still moved around the ashram and managed things. So Ramana, the ego, the body-mind organism, and identification functioning through that body-mind organism was still there, but without the limiting beliefs that were there previously that caused all of the suffering. So what falls away is the psychological me, the doer,
yes,
the one attached.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I hear you deeply. Thank you, because you like again, and you have this great like practiced way to like often show this perspective, and like help the people, help me very much. Thank you. I'm deeply like grateful you for your work on this on this because you helped me a lot. Yeah. So, but there is still people who will ask you about questions. So there is like still in the world like suffering from this like identification, psychological identification with the contraction of the body, let's say. So my question is, why the contraction happened in God? That because this is the fun of the God that created contraction in the people, or even young people.
You can just look at it as evolution, if you like. Evolution is a work in progress. And the way that evolution has evolved has created complexity, increased intellectual capacity in humans, and with that increased intellectual capacity came the capacity to contemplate one's existence, and that is what creates the potential for a psychological me to come in, because once the complexity is there to ask, why did this happen? This shouldn't have happened, and all of these questions, then the me doer comes into place. And evolution will fix that in time, because it's not particularly useful. It's detrimental to an optimization or to peace of mind. So we can put God out of the picture and just say that the human being as we know it, human beings, which is with the propensity to suffer a lot in life, is simply because evolution has reached that point. And it doesn't have to be any more personal than that.
Yeah, I think I feel I need to like on your ears that I can feel that this time I think because when I put on my Zoom, I think, oh yes, there is 3 hands more, so you have like no, they want to, people they want to talk to you, so I need to like say goodbye, and I'm very grateful that it was occasion to like connect with you, Roger. I wish you great this your like the satsang in the future, because you said that you again going like and have satsang live. Maybe sometimes some I hope in some day maybe we meet live like on the chair, in the room with chairs and something like that. Yeah. So deep like grateful, like how to say what in nice English words, deep warm like energy for you, and yeah, take care, and yeah, I need to finish, so I'm.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to talk to you again. Hello, Belinda.
Roger,
Hello.
can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Roger, can you hear me? Okay, I have a question, or not really a question, but a comment, because based on what you were talking, what you're saying with the, I understand, I realize that what is happening to me is I think I fully understand the teaching intellectually. So there was a phrase that was used where he said the function of totality, and I really like that because it's very impersonal. So anything that I say, this is a functioning of totality. So my issue now is that I am almost 50 years old and I really want a child. So I feel that I have this attachment to this outcome of having a child. And I will say, well, that is just the function. This attachment I'm having is a functioning of totality. If I feel like I am suffering because of it, it's the functioning of totality. Everything is a functioning of totality, but at the end of the day, it still does not take away, it does not reduce this desire and attachment that I have, and this wanting that I have, and this feeling that it might never happen for me, and I don't like that.
No, I'm sure you don't like it because it's not comfortable. The realization is that that's life, right? That life is sometimes pleasure, sometimes pain, and sometimes suffering. And suffering will be there according to our structure.
But this
And
seems like it will be always suffering, not sometimes suffering. Because if I don't get it, it will be suffering for the rest of my life. I will always be thinking of it.
yes, so that is the functioning of totality.
For me to suffer until I die.
Well, the functioning of totality is what is. So it's whatever is happening for anyone is the function of totality. So if you do suffer for the next 10 years, then that would be the functioning of totality. If you don't like the suffering, which you're bound not to, suffering is uncomfortable, right? It's an uncomfortableness with oneself. It's not something that we can like. Then if there is a resistance to that suffering, that is more suffering. Right? There are different sorts of suffering. So you have your attachment to having a child, let's say, and that is a suffering when it's not happening. Then there can be a resistance to the suffering, which is a secondary suffering. And if that's how it plays out, then that is the functioning of totality, if that's how you want to phrase it, because that's what's happening. So if you say, I don't want that to be the functioning of totality, that thought is also part of the functioning of totality, and that is the secondary suffering.
But
So
Roger, quite sorry. One other thing though, this I also have a feeling like, you know, when people say they just have a gut feeling that it will happen for me, that is also the functioning of totality. So why would totality give me this feeling that I deep down I know I'm going to have children, but it doesn't happen?
well, it could be there to be frustrating. It could be there because you are going to have children. I don't know the answer. But if it's there, it is the functioning of totality. Now, if you see that your insistence that you have children when it's not happening, if you recognize that that movement is suffering, right, to be in resistance to not having children, at some point, if it is the functioning of totality, you might say, on top of not having the pleasure of children or the pain of children, because the likelihood is that you have children and it is not all pleasure, on top of the pleasure and pain of children or not having children, there is this added load of suffering that is coming from the attitude to your life circumstance. And it can be that as part of the functioning of totality, at some point you say, it makes no sense. Like the thought arises, it makes no sense to be in resistance to what life is delivering, because that is only adding an extra layer of uncomfortableness on top of the already pleasurable or painful circumstance on life. And the same can be said for your attitude towards the primary suffering. If the primary suffering is there, and you see this attitude of saying, I don't want the primary suffering to be there, you say, resisting the primary suffering is just another layer of suffering on top of what is there. And that realization, if it really hits home, it really hits home that this resistance is just adding a whole extra layer of uncomfortableness on top of the inevitable circumstance that is out of my control. If I'm going to have children, I will have children. if it hits home, then the suffering, the involvement, the resistance may just fade away.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Hi, Melissa. I'll make Gurleen is after that. I'll have Gurleen as the last question. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, Roger. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can.
Oh, I have a little laryngitis, so sorry, but as long as you can make out my words, that's sufficient. First, I want to express again a great gratitude for the presence of these many teachings in my life, in this experience of life. And I know that it's not a personal you that's well, there is and there isn't. There's a person, but there is also, of course, there is the happening, or maybe another way to put it is the grace of the appearance of teachings that are becoming more and more clear. So, and along those same lines, to thank you for your patience in in these satsangs, because I find that it's as much as it is as much a teaching for me to hear the other participants expressing their various struggles with finding their way, and I'm learning as much from that as I am from what you specifically express as the teaching. So thank you so much for continuing to do these. And although I don't know if this year, of course, I won't be traveling to Australia. I live in the US. There's a slight possibility if you do a retreat next year. I'm thinking ahead, but if you ever come to the US, anyway, perhaps someday we would meet face to face. But this is more than sufficient at the moment. So my question is simply this: it's becoming more and more frequent that even after an experience of pleasure or pain, and seeing my attachments to the pleasure and to the pushing away of the pain, that I can contemplate it perhaps a little while later, and increasingly be able to accept it as the happening of life itself, and allow it and let it to show me whatever is needed to be seen. And so my question is this: what I see is that there's still a very strong, there's still a habit. The mind has habits. I've spent a lifetime as someone who analyzes things a lot, as a spiritual seeker and also as a scientist on many levels. So my mind likes to get involved, and it becomes it's a troublemaker. So my question is simply, is there a shortcut to working with this habit, the habits of mind?
Being aware of them is the beginning or close to the end of that habit. And even when I say that, it's not a prescription, because what you find is you become aware of a habit only when you become aware of it. A certain movement in the seeking happens when it starts. And you think, why didn't I think about this a year ago? And the truth is because you weren't the one controlling the thinking. So
Yes.
that always unfolds as it's destined to unfold. So when you ask, is there a shortcut? And the doer is asking, what can I do? No, there isn't. But if we rephrase and say, what is the beginning of the end of a habit? And I would say it is awareness of the habit and an interest in observing it without insisting that it changes, which really means understanding that the outcome is not in our control. But the curiosity, the interest, the awareness means that a light is now being shone on it. And until the light is shone on it, nothing is going to change. As soon as the light is shone on it, then there is real potential. And I think what we need to do is be the watcher of the fact that, oh, light is now being shone on this, because it wasn't a week ago, let's say, or a month ago, or a year ago, and now it is. So we say, oh, even the fact that a light is being shone on this habit, this topic, is happening and not my doing.
Yes, thank you. That's perfectly clear. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Melissa. Hello, Gurleen.
Hello, Roger. Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Great. Thank you, Roger. I second all the gratitude that everybody is sharing. It's just priceless to have you available for questions and clarity, and with your patience and your persistence to keeping at the practicality of the teaching and just bringing us back on track no matter what. So just so much gratitude for that.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. There's a lot of contemplation happening over these weeks, and I just wanted to confirm something that became intellectually clear today, and just ask maybe if that's valid or not. And then a couple of other questions that were just unfolding within me over this week. So the first one, Roger, the concept that the uncomfortableness with the other or life or the concept of God is really just an uncomfortableness with oneself or myself. So in the top-down approach, like as the formless awareness, I doesn't make sense, but experientially it is clear what that means. Coming from the bottom-up approach, practically speaking, I really don't understand what that means. So like if I'm blaming someone, is that a projection of my own, let's say, unworthiness? Is that what that would mean in that bottom-up approach, or what would that exactly mean?
Yes, we're saying that, so just to repeat, that an uncomfortableness with the other, or an uncomfortableness with God, or an uncomfortableness with life, ultimately is an uncomfortableness with oneself. So we'll take us one step back, just for context for people. Say suffering is essentially an uncomfortableness with oneself or the other. And the suffering that takes the form of an uncomfortableness with the other is ultimately an uncomfortableness with oneself. So at the end of the day, we're saying that all suffering is an uncomfortableness with oneself. And what it means is that when there is a self-comfortableness, a self-knowing, none of that uncomfortableness with the other happens. So we then say that the uncomfortableness with the other is simply a manifestation of an uncomfortableness with oneself, which really means not knowing oneself, not knowing the true self, meaning there is the existence of the psychological me. And that psychological me, at its root, is unworthy, incomplete, afraid, because life can essentially kill it in any moment by simply not giving it what it thinks it needs. So the resolution for uncomfortableness of all sorts, including uncomfortableness with the other, is to find the psychological me dissolving, and that is what dissolves the uncomfortableness with oneself. But in more practical terms, what you said is that we will blame the other when we are looking for an explanation that is not me. So we will look outward simply because it's too uncomfortable to think it is my responsibility. And so we automatically want to find out who to blame. Who did this? And a lot of the time it's actually blaming the other is just a movement to not see fault in ourselves. So it's, and we don't want to see fault in ourselves because we have this doership, and so by acknowledging fault in ourselves, which can be just a biological, oh yes, I pressed the wrong button, I forgot to put something in the fridge. Because the doership is there, we can't acknowledge that easily. We can't just say, yes, I made a mistake, because it comes back to meaning I am incompetent as a entity, so that blaming the other really is always linked to the existence of that psychological me.
Thank you, Roger. The second thing that I find myself living over these weeks is feeling the emotion. So it being expressed or lived out as a resistance. And I remember you mentioning that, which happens as well, that becoming as unenlightened as the emotion is. So not to bring the framework in that moment, justify it or to suppress it in a way. So is there a way, like I find myself confused afterwards, or maybe even during sometimes, that what is the difference between feeling the emotion and in the movement of expressing and then maybe it being released, versus indulging or identifying with the emotion? So what's the difference?
I guess it comes down to an awareness of the emotion. So you could, let's say, have a lot of hatred towards someone. And so the suggestion is that at times it is valid to not diffuse the emotion of hatred that might be just under the surface by, saying that blaming the other, hating the other is simply a belief in doership and blah, blah, blah. There's a time when we should put, or it's valid to put all the concepts aside and just let the hatred well up and feel it, and maybe allow it to verbalize or come out in however that is. Now, I don't suggest that particular process being one that you do in the presence of the person that you have hatred for. It might happen that way, but if it does happen that way, then it probably will be accompanied by certain other complications. So as a practice, there are times when we're on our own and we can feel these emotions, and it is valid to allow them to flower in all of their color. And at a certain ripeness of the seeker, there will be the capacity, not that someone makes it happen, it will just be there, is that there is going to be both the allowing the verbiage to spew out, and either during or after, an awareness of that as a movement of energy, as a expression of old doership and attachment to outcome that was in the system, and relating to it as that, which means when it's over, the hatred for the person doesn't really persist, because the hatred existed in that energy. And so once that energy is expended, then from one moment to the next, you might find, oh, the hatred is gone. The alternative is where you have an attitude of hatred towards someone and you express it, and there isn't any understanding internally that hatred is actually based on the psychological me, is out of our control, based on genes and up-to-date conditioning, all of that. There's no understanding of that, and we just express it and then continue to have the attitude towards the other as the one that has hurt me, and I hate them, and there's no distance or awareness of that hatred as an energy or as a psychological movement. When there is awareness of it and all suffering as a psychological movement, then that's what I describe as the releasing of that structure. Maybe not the whole structure gets released, but parts of it. It gets broken down into smaller and smaller or less intense structure of hatred, for example. Simply because there is an allowing the system to go into a purge mode and an awareness, either simultaneous or in retrospect, of what that purge was.
Yeah, thank you. Now, as you explained it, it somehow made clear because I've had that experience, so I understand the difference now. What I am experiencing, Roger, is a sadness or resistance. It's more towards life, as if life is failing me, and I find myself very low energy. And I am fortunate enough to spend my days doing nothing and just be with it. And that's where the question is arising from, that is this being with it really an indulgence in it, or is it a movement towards really understanding it? So like where is that line between?
Well, what I can say is that it's not at all surprising to find oneself overwhelmed with emotion, energetic energies, let's say, through this process. Such energies that will extract motivation, will make life seem meaningless, all sorts of energies that can be overwhelming and clouding, and giving the process its space, being with it, as you said, not burying it under the carpet, which might be a tendency that might be more comfortable if we can distract ourselves from it, is all very valid. And my experience of those sort of roller coaster rides is that at some point it really is something of the past, and in retrospect it looks very much like, wow, a purging of the system, a purging of the old belief structures that are no longer being supported by the system, and so they are ejected out. And in that process of them being ejected out, which can be lengthy, there sometimes doesn't look like there's any light at the end of the tunnel. We are completely, our experience of life is colored by that energy that is flowing in the system. But it can help to keep in mind that that's what it is, energy that is going to color the system, and that, a week ago it might not have been there, in a week's time or in a day's time it might not be there, and that this is very much part of the process.
Thank you, Roger. I appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you everyone for joining, and I'll see you around the 19th of November.